Good evening. It is wonderful to see everyone this evening. We are continuing our look at different figures in the book of Hebrews, specifically Hebrews chapter 11, that either are there, but it's important for us to maybe look a little deeper, but we kind of understand why they're there, or maybe they're there and we don't understand why they're there. And I think the latter is true for the one we're going to look at tonight. Last time, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, we looked at Samson. Samson is one of those characters that, while yes, there's a lot that stands out and you're like, whoa, this is cool, when it comes to his morals, Samson is a rather dismal story. We're not looking at quite as dismal of a story this time. This time it's more of a, I thought, okay. It's almost like this one shouldn't be there unless this one were also there, kind of a deal. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the story of Barak. Now, this is not the 40-some-odd president of the United States. This is a character way back in the book of Judges. This is a character that many of us probably have not heard hardly anything about. This is a character that somehow seems to make his way into Hebrews chapter 11 when someone else seems to really have the spotlight in the story. So why is he there? Well, let's talk about the story of Barak. In the book of Judges, as we're very familiar by now, you have this cycle that keeps on going on. Israel rebels against God, they abandon the covenant, they begin worshiping idols, and therefore one of the nations around them, just kind of as a spin the wheel and pick one, right, gets to take them over and oppress them for a period of time. God allows this to happen as punishment for them abandoning his covenant. And so at this particular point, you have a king named Jabin and his captain Sisera, who take over and have subjugated the people of Israel. At this time, it seems that Jabin and Sisera, and we'll just kind of refer to Sisera from now on because he's kind of the main guy in the story. He's the leader of the army. Sisera, it seems, is kind of unequaled in at least the area because of the military force that he can bring to bear. Now, we think today about, how militaries are composed, and we think about people with machine guns and tanks and planes and all this kind of stuff. Well, we have to kind of obviously shift the technology, but still maybe get some of the same idea in that we're told Sisera has 900 chariots of iron in his army. Now, obviously, there's no aviation is what I'm trying to say. There's no aviation, so we're just talking about ground troops. If you were to remove the airplanes and bombers and all that kind of stuff, you're probably thinking that tanks are pretty high up on the list in our military. If you have a whole bunch of tanks, you're in pretty good shape. Think about chariots kind of in the same way as tanks for us today. If you've got a bunch of chariots, specifically almost 1,000 chariots, going up against an average army, you have the better firepower in the ancient world, in ancient warfare. And specifically iron chariots. These aren't just chariots that, they hit a bump and the wood cracks and they fall apart, right? No, these are iron chariots. Essentially, these things are designed either to just charge straight at the enemy or to just go around the enemy, and they would have like archers, things like that, in the back of the chariot and just essentially sniping people with the archer fire. There's not much you can do about it as just foot soldiers. So he has 900 chariots of iron. Israel, by all metrics, doesn't stand a chance against that kind of firepower, if you will. So Israel has been subjugated. But there does seem to be a bright spot at this point. This is recorded for us in Judges chapter 4. And the bright spot is a little bit different from what we've seen before, and really what we'll see throughout most of Judges, and in a sense, even most of the Old Testament. Because the primary character is not a male leader, as is often the case. It is a woman named Deborah. Deborah, who is described as both a prophetess and a judge, who is essentially leading the people of Israel at this time. Now, we think about the implications of that given just their society, leaving out the discussions we could have in general of removing society, removing culture. In their society, in their culture, regardless of how we might look back on it, that would have been extremely unusual. Not the prophetess part. Female prophetesses were pretty common. But for her to be leading the people in the capacity of a judge, that was not normal at all, either in Israelite history or in the ancient world in general. And yet we're told that's exactly the situation. That's going to tell us something as we move forward. But we're told that she was there, she was prophesying, she was judging, we're told under a palm tree. Essentially, she had just set up shop under a specific palm tree. We might imagine this is probably like a palm tree by a spring or something, so an area people would kind of frequent. And so she would be there, they would come, they would handle their disputes or situations with her, and so forth. But as Israel has rebelled, been oppressed, now they're beginning to recognize their problem and make things right. It seems like that's always the pattern. Deborah, being a prophetess as well as a judge, says, all right, God has said now it's time to do something about your oppression. And so she speaks to a man named Barak. We're not told much about Barak at this point. We're simply told that he is a man who seems to have the responsibility of leading the army, whatever that might be, of Israel. Whatever they have to speak of that are the armed forces, well, that is his job. Or at least that is the job that he's been called to by God. So Deborah says, Barak, God is instructing you to do something now. You are to take 10,000 men and you are to attack the army of Sisera. Now that sounds like a suicide mission based on any kind of metrics that we could possibly think about in ancient warfare. 10,000 foot soldiers against 900 chariots plus all the others. It's not like he just had 900 chariots. That's the cream of the crop of his army. He has plenty of soldiers besides that. But he, that is Barak, is told to take these soldiers, these 10,000 men that he has, and to fight a very imposing force. Now Barak has a choice here. Not only has the woman who is leading Israel at this time given him instructions, but as a prophetess, she is giving him instructions from God himself. But Barak gives an interesting response. Barak says, if you go with me, I'll go. If you go to battle with me, I will go and I will fight Sisera. But if you don't go with me, I'm not going to go. Now we could guess why he has this attitude. We'll talk a little bit more about it in a bit. But whatever the situation, he's essentially giving an ultimatum. I will only go under these circumstances. He has instructions from essentially the leader of Israel and from God himself through this prophetess. And he says, I'm giving an ultimatum. I'll only do it on this condition. Deborah responds. And she says, you know what? I'll go. We don't know if she was already planning on going. It wouldn't have been particularly common for a woman, even a woman of her station, to go down with the army at this particular point. But she says, I'll go. But you need to know something. And it seems that this statement that she's about to make is directly because of how he responded to the summons. She says, you need to know something. The glory of the day is not going to go to you, but to a woman. Now again, dismissing for a moment how we might think of that statement in our culture, for them, that is a statement of dishonor. Meaning, it is much more honorable if a man loses the glory of some deed to another man. It would have been considered dishonorable for the glory to instead go to a woman rather than a man. So she tells him, the glory of the day is going to go to a woman and not to you. Now, in the circumstances, Who do you think she's talking about? Well, you would think she's talking about herself, right? She is the one who is in a leadership position. Obviously, she's saying, if I go down with you, I'll get the glory and not you. As we'll see, that's not exactly the case. But they're going down to meet in this valley. As memory serves, this is the same valley where we get the term much later on, Armageddon. It is a valley that is essentially by Mount Megiddo, more or less, and there's a valley kind of in front of it, and there's several major battles that are fought here. But it's also by a brook. Now, brook may be a strange way of describing, because really what it's described as, in more technical terms, it would be called a wadi. That means a seasonal river, a river that did not flow all year round, especially in an area like Israel. It would flow during the rainy season. And otherwise, it was kind of a dry creek bed. Well, it seems, at least from kind of putting the pieces together, that at this point, it was kind of dry. So, they meet in this field to do battle. Again, we're not told a whole lot of details about the battle, but we're given little snippets here and there. Especially from the song, getting a little ahead of ourselves in chapter 5, of victory that is sung about this battle. It seems that as the armies approach to meet each other in battle, that God makes it rain. Now, if you've ever tried to drive a wheelbarrow or a wagon or any kind of thing with non-rubber tires, right? Something that's more a little bit just kind of easily stuck. Or even if you tried to maybe drive on like red clay or something like that that's wet, it doesn't work too well. So you can imagine on flat, dry ground, chariots are going to wreck any army. But all of a sudden you get wet, muddy ground near a dry riverbank that's starting to flash flood, and all of a sudden the tide, quite literally, is turned. It seems that as God makes it rain, the waters begin coursing down the dry riverbed, and all of a sudden, the assets, the chariots of Sisera's army become liabilities, and he is soundly defeated by Barak and his forces, Deborah also, of course, being there with him in this scenario. Just like that. Again, it's not described in great grandiose detail. That's one of the crazy things about how the Bible is written as opposed to other ancient books. Other ancient books, they would just describe all these, incredible details and make it very kind of build it up, make it picturesque, the whole battle. And we're just told, oh, it happened, right? They were defeated. But just like that, Israel has been delivered from their oppressors. But the story's not done. Because Sisera, the captain, Jabin's general essentially, he manages to escape the battle. And he begins to run away, trying to get back to his homeland, maybe regroup, who knows, maybe he can raise another army. And as he's trying to escape, we're told that there is a Kenite, that is essentially a relative, or at least a part of the same tribe, not tribe of Israel, but neighboring tribe, of Moses' in-laws. But this Kenite has kind of separated themselves, and they live in this area kind of in between, and they're at peace with Jabin and Sisera. And so as Sisera is running away, he sees the tent of someone that he's at peace with, and the woman of the house, if you will, invites him in. Says, yes, come in, be refreshed, rest, you're running away, we'll give you shelter, and so forth. And so Sisera gratefully turns into the tent, and he rests, he's given some food, some drink, he lies down to try and recover some of his strength so he can keep fleeing back to King Jabin. But the woman's name is Jael. And if you know that name, you probably know it because of what's about to happen. You see, Jael may not be allied with Israel officially, or at least her husband may not be, but she has a sense of who is in the right here. And so as Sisera falls asleep, naturally he's quite exhausted from this chase, Jael, she takes a tent peg, is what we would call it, Probably, it could be wooden, but probably, even at this time, it would have been metal, because we've got to remember, their tents are a little bit more, how shall we put it, complex than ours. This would be more like the tent of a nomad, so like a full house, but in tent form almost. So probably more of something like a bronze peg, something like that. She takes it and a hammer, and she goes into the tent while the guy's asleep, and just right through his temple. And he's dead. Again, very nondescript, just, oh, okay, now he's dead. The army's defeated, he's dead, okay, we're done, right? Barak, of course, is the one who is chasing Sisera down. He comes to the tent, and Jael sees him coming, just like she saw Sisera coming, and she invites Barak in as well, but she invites Barak in to say, oh yeah, here's the guy you're chasing. Got it for you. And then, as we mentioned, oh, I forgot to give the picture. There's some very interesting pictures being given. I felt like this was the best one I could find. But as the story ends, you see in chapter 5 a song that is composed. This song is composed by Deborah and Barak both, although it's usually referred to as the Song of Deborah specifically. And this song is meant to celebrate the victory that God gives Israel over Sisera and his army, over their oppressors. I'm not going to take the time to just kind of go piece by piece through the song, but it is exalting God for what he has done. It is discussing the events of this deliverance. It lifts up Deborah, it lifts up Barak, but it especially lifts up Jael in fulfillment of Deborah's promise that a woman would get the glory from the day. And ultimately, it once again rejoices that God's people are now safe because of God. That's the story. As we look at the story, there's a couple things that are interesting. Number one, it would seem like there are at least 3 people that could be mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11. And if you were to rank those 3 people in terms of likelihood to be mentioned, I kind of think Barak belongs at the bottom of the list, don't you? Even Deborah says, you're not going to get the glory from this battle. So really, it would be like Deborah, Jael, Barak. And yet Deborah is not mentioned in the entirety of Hebrews 11. Neither is Jael. Only Barak is mentioned in Hebrews 11. So now that we've wrapped up the story, I want us just for a couple minutes to maybe try and work through why. Why is it that Barak is the one who is mentioned in Hebrews 11? And to do that, we need to start with this question. Go back toward the beginning of the story. Why did Barak insist that Deborah go down with him? Deborah tells him, God said you need to go, take these 10,000 men and go. And he gives this kind of ultimatum, I'll only go if you go with me. Why does he do that? Andrew?
Well, the first reason that I would look at is maybe he doesn't 100% fully trust her. He does trust God, but it's one of those, if you come with me, then I know that you are telling the truth because you're putting your life on the line as well as mine.
Okay, maybe an insurance policy, right? Whether it's he doesn't trust her or whether it's kind of like a Saul type situation. If you remember King Saul, it's like, okay, if I have Samuel by my side, I'll be good kind of a situation. Very good. Why else might he do this? Why else might he insist that Deborah go down with him? Okay, right? Any military leader, right? If you have somebody who can predict the future with you, then we're set, right? So maybe she can predict what's going to happen. What else? Why does he insist that she has to go with him, or else he won't go? Okay, maybe this is almost like I've got my, what do you call that? My magic artifact with me. That's kind of how they treated the Ark of the Covenant later on, right? Phyllis?
She speaks for God.
Okay, she speaks for God, right? So I have God's messenger with me. Why else? Yes, Kiwi?
Maybe because since she is a prophetess of God, he believes that she is under God's protection, and therefore by bringing her with him, that him and his army is under God's protection.
Okay, I like that. Think about, for example, in the New Testament, when you have Jesus in the boat with the disciples and the storm comes, and he's like, why were you afraid? Implying, if you think I'm the Messiah, if you believe that, well, then you know that God isn't going to let the Messiah drown in a storm. So why are you afraid? Right? Similar situation here, perhaps. If Deborah's with me, she must be under God's protection. Therefore, we're not going to lose because God wouldn't let her lose and be taken prisoner or whatever. Why else, though? Let's even back up. Why is Deborah in the position of leading Israel in the first place? Okay. Again, we have to maybe set aside some of our own perceptions from our culture and think about theirs. If she is in this position, in their culture, it almost certainly means no one else was willing to step up. In other words, this is a time in Israel where leadership doesn't exist. Where no one is willing to step up and say, someone has to lead God's people, and it's a tough job, ask Moses, right? But someone needs to do it. It seems like Deborah is the only one willing to do that, because no one else, even those who might be in the leading families, those in the families of the elders of the tribes, those in this and that and the other, whatever qualifications you might say, the indication is, again, from their culture standpoint, no one else is willing to step up and lead. So why would Barak insist that Deborah go with him? Why isn't Barak the judge? You ever think about it that way? If Barak is in some kind of leadership position, clearly, at least in the sense that he's been chosen to lead this army, why isn't he the judge? Well, it seems like he's not willing to step up to that capacity. So we've talked about flaws, as we talked about a lot of these people that are recorded for us in Hebrews 11. For example, Gideon, fearful. Samson, vices, right? Temptations. It seems like Barak's quality, or Barak's flawed quality, is that he's not willing to step up and lead. Is some of that fear? Maybe. Is some of that lack of qualification? Maybe. Is some of that self-doubt? We don't know all the exact reasons. But we see him not wanting to be the leader. Even when God tells him, here's something you can do to lead, he says, I really don't want the responsibility to lead unless this other person is here with me. And they can share the burden / maybe kind of really be the real leader and I'll be the other leader. Right? So, let's then ask the question that we have to ask a lot in Hebrews 11. In spite of this, how does Barak still demonstrate faith? The fact that he's in Hebrews 11 tells us he has faith of some kind. What is it about Barak in this story that shows faith? Andrew?
Well, he was still willing to go. So
Okay.
that was still faith in that. He had faith enough there to deprecate them that they would win. So I mean, there's definitely faith there.
Okay. Clearly, Barak, there were some things lacking in his response, right? To say, I'm not going to do what God said unless, that just should make you cringe as you read it, okay? But he does. He goes out on a battlefield in what, to the naked eye, should be an open and shut case of, oh, you're dead now. But he goes. That does show some faith. Even though it could have been better in how he responded to the call. Think about what it takes for someone like Barak to put himself in that position. Again, someone who doesn't want to be leader, doesn't want that responsibility, but even just as a soldier, let's just think of him that way, he's still willing to stand there and at least fight. That does take some faith that God is going to do something. Perhaps some of that faith is in the fact that Deborah is telling the truth. Perhaps some of that faith is in it being a message from God himself. However this works in Barak's mind, there's faith there. Even despite his lack of leadership, his unwillingness to step up and, show a little bit more courage than what he did. Now, as we ask this question then, let's complement it with another question. Even though we can say from that, as we just talked about, that Barak did show faith, why is he here instead of Deborah or Jael? Meaning in Hebrews 11. Why pick him? Okay. Okay. We certainly see him saying, you know what, I'm fine with not receiving the honor. I just want you with me. That is given in the story as more of a punishment almost. So there's one sense in which we could say maybe it shows humility. There's another sense in which we could say, well, you can be humble, but God say, well, you're being too humble because I told you to step up and you're not. So it's kind of a little bit of both maybe here. But why else? Why is Barak of the three chosen? Yes?
So, the other thing that is, because I think a lot of us can relate to that, because how often are we given things that we should be doing, and we sit there and say, well, you're coming with me. And sometimes we just get down to this.
Okay, good. Remember the list, the part of the list that we're in now in Hebrews 11. Time would fail us to tell of Barak and of Samson and of Gideon, right? What do all these characters have in common? They're not the best examples of faith. They're deeply flawed people, each in their own way. That's kind of the point. The reason that Barak is chosen as part of this list is because he's not the best example of faith that we could pick out of this story. And yet he's still an example of faith that God accomplished a great deal through. All three of these that we've studied most recently, Gideon, Samson, and Barak, all three of these, we could pick better examples. All three of them, however, demonstrate that, as Andrew just said, even if we are starting not from the best place, a little bit of faith can start big things happening as we move forward down the road. So as we wrap up, Barak was not the best when it comes to leadership. Certainly he was lacking as a leader. But he still had the faith. Again, not the most ideal scenario for it, but he still had the faith to face what seemed like an invincible army because he trusted that God would be on his side. And look what God did. Again, just imagine for a second, let's just use an example. I should have done this at the beginning. Let's just say we turn out the entire population of Wellington and we try and fight, let's even just say 25 tanks. Who do you think is going to win? No foot soldiers even, just 25 tanks. Right? Seems like an open and shut textbook run over the opposition. Invincible. He had enough faith, even despite his flaws, to face them down and believe that God was on his side. So yeah, that's an example of faith. Now, as we wrap up with all of those scenarios, flaws, fear, lack of leadership, vices, think about what would have happened in each of those stories, especially if you move on from the story and continue into the future of that person's life, if they start working on those flaws and keep the faith at the same time. That's part of the challenge that the Hebrews writer is giving us. Even with those flaws, look at what they were able to do. Imagine what you can do if you start recognizing your flaws and working on them while still keeping that same faith. Everyone has a starting point, but we can only go uphill in the positive sense from here. Again, I hope this is helpful, kind of giving us some more insights into this story. We always want to extend the invitation. If there is anything that we can help you with, pray for you about, we want to do that as the family of God. So please let us know if there is as we stand and as we sing together.
Have thine affections
Been nailed to the cross, is thy heart right with God? Dost thou count all